Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and Tebow.
Alongside Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. The Cardinals offense has gone cold, and I mean ice cold, over the course of the last 10 days. This has really happened now for a little more than 2 weeks. You go back to that San Diego Padres series. They score 3 and 1 run in those 3 games against the Padres. Now, it was easy to explain that. You're going up against very good pitching for the San Diego Padres, and it's a 3-game set. You win 2 out of 3. You don't feel bad about it, but it was a little frustrating at the time. And then you go to Kansas City, and your pitching staff completely implodes. So you scored 6, 5, and 12 runs in those games, and somehow only win 1 of them. But then since then, that's where the story really takes a turn. Against Arizona, 3-3-4-0-1. Against Miami, 0-1-2. And now in the first 2 games of the series against Atlanta, they scored 5 runs and 1 run. This offense is not getting the production that it did early in the season. And most notably, it's not getting the power that it did earlier in the season. And T-Bone, it's pretty easy to explain. You look at what's gone wrong. Well, how about this? Ivan Herrera over this stretch is batting 111 with basically no extra base power. JJ Wetherholt batting 182 with literally 0 extra base power. Alec Burleson batting 130, not much power. And Jordan Walker, while hitting for average at 250, which is not great, but not bad, he's not hitting for any power. Literally 0 extra base hits over this stretch of 7 games for him. Those are the guys that were carrying the offense for much of the season, and now none of them are producing at a high level. They've all gone cold simultaneously. The only guy in this lineup hitting right now is Lars Nootbaar. What is your level of concern right now? Because this was our fear coming into the season, and now, really for the first time, we're seeing an extended stretch where the fears are becoming realized.
So my fear for them overall, in the long-term view of things, is very low. Right? I think at some point you're going to see Ivan Herrera start hitting again, Wetherholt hitting again, Walker hitting again, and doing damage, right? I mean, I don't think you have the start to the season that the 4 of these guys had, and then it just disappears, right? It's not like Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes when the monsters came and stole the powers of the NBA players. I don't think that has happened.
That wasn't Looney Tunes, man. That was Space Jam.
Oh, my bad. Sorry. But you knew where I was going with it. You knew where I was going with it. It's been a long day. But my concern, though, for the short term is very high. And the reason that I say that is because you made a great point earlier today on BK and Ferrario. We are getting closer and closer to them making a decision on what they're going to do at the trade deadline. And as we've always said on this podcast, if there's any doubt of what should we do, if the question is, hey, we're 50-50, Ty goes to sell. And they are getting cold at the wrong time. You know, they have not been playing great baseball over the last 30, 40 games, I would say. They've been below 500 in that stretch, and they're slowly starting to fall to where I think 2 weeks ago when we did this podcast, they were the number 1 wild card. Well, now they're all the way down to 3, and there's a bunch of teams that are nipping at their heels, and their schedule's getting very tough now. I mean, we've seen the first 2 games as we're recording this in the Braves series. Then you go to Wrigley, which is where it's nightmare stuff when the Cardinals go to Wrigley. Then you've got the Brewers who just keep on winning for 5 games at home, and then you get the Braves again, and then that's the end of the first half of the season. So the reason that I would put it on long-term scale 1 to 10, I'm at like a 2 or a 3. I'm not overly concerned. I think all 4 guys will ultimately be fine. But for the short-term vision of where this season is going for the Cardinals, I'm at an 8. They are going cold at the wrong time, and they don't have the pitching at an elite enough level to help kind of mask these deficiencies with these 4 guys going cold at the same time.
If you told me at the beginning of the year, Burleson, Walker, Wetherholt, and Herrera would all finish the season with an OPS above 750, and 3 of the 4 would be at 800 or better, I would have signed up in a heartbeat. Like that would have been a huge, huge win for the Cardinals with those 4 guys at the top of the order coming through in that way. Honestly, if you told me nothing else about the season and just said I can lock that in for those 4 hitters, I think I would have taken it instead of pressing my luck for whatever else could come with maybe the pitchers figuring it out or other guys in the lineup, whatever. That was the single most important thing for this season, is to find a core group of position players to build around for the future. And we've seen that. And lately it has not been as productive for any of those guys as it was early in the season. But we've talked about this before. Everybody goes through slumps in Major League Baseball. You can look at the back of the baseball card for Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge or whoever it is that's your favorite player. They're going to have a week where it looks bad, because that's how you get to an OPS at the end of the season that's below 1,000, right? Because you will also look at the back of their baseball cards. There will be stretches of time where it is scorched earth. They are crushing the baseball, and it feels as though they will never record another out again. Walker went through that stretch, and now we're seeing the other side of that. And this is where you get to the middle, right? Like right now, he's at an 850 OPS. That's a really, really good OPS at this point in the season. The fact that he's able to be there 81 games in for him is remarkable, given what we're coming from. But it was always likely there would be some regression in his game. The fact that it's happening at the same time as regression for Burleson and Herrera and Wetherholt is why you feel it so much right now. And so I agree with you. The timing is what sucks, is that it's all happening simultaneously, and it's happening almost exactly 1 month before the trade deadline. We've talked about this before. The Cardinals season does not run through early October. The Cardinals season runs through basically August 2nd. And once they get there, and let's be real, probably closer to like July 31st.
Yeah.
Once you get to that place, it's decision time. And Chaim Bloom has to be ready to make choices. That means potentially selling off assets like a Dustin May or Jojo Romero, maybe Riley O'Brien. Maybe it is making a more significant move, which we'll get into later today, with one of the position players that you deem to be, expendable for whatever reason. Maybe a Lars Nootbaar, for example. And if you're going to make those decisions in early August, well, now is the time where it's time to put up or shut up, honestly. And so that's really where the question comes down to. I'm with you. I'm not super worried about the offense. I think it's going to be fine long term, but you don't have long term. You have like 3 weeks to get this thing figured out, because you also have a 5-day stretch with the All-Star break where you're not playing any games. So you've got like 25 games between now and the decision date when Chaim Bloom has to figure out what he's doing. What is my level of confidence that they're going to turn it around by then, given what the opponents look like coming up in the next couple of weeks? Whew. I can't say it's particularly high, unfortunately. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is.
Well, and this also ties into the fact that this is all coming at the worst time, not only just because of the way that the schedule is playing out and how close you are to the deadline, it's also while other holes are emerging on the roster, right? Like, if you think back to... Now, even if all 4 guys were struggling like they are right now, your big 4, it would have been tough to overcome this in May. But you think back to May, it was, man, we feel pretty good about anything that would come out of that bullpen. Like, you felt good about Stanek, felt good about Soriano, felt good about JoJo, felt good about O'Brien. I think Alex would make the argument you could feel good about Graceffo, and I think at times that was fair. And the rotation had 3 guys that were pitching very well, and Libby wasn't a just black hole on the roster. And now you look at it and you go, boy, okay, so our offense isn't hitting. The bullpen is, I don't even know who to trust coming out of that pen right now. I don't think anybody's been pitching particularly well out of the bullpen. And you look at it and you go, man, Liberatore, now he had a good start against the Braves, but Libby's a guy that you don't know what you're getting from the rotation anymore. And you've got 2 spots in your rotation that are question mark. Leahy's been better here of late, but I think still fair to question, okay, how long is that going to really sustain? On top of the fact that then May had to skip a start because he dealt with back tightness. Like, everything that you could imagine going wrong for about a 2.5-3 week stretch feels like it is going wrong on the Cardinals. It's why it feels like it's really starting to snowball.
I agree with you. The fact that they're around 500 while all of that's happening speaks to the quality of the team, honestly.
100%.
Right? Like, this team, everything T-Bone just said is real. The rotation has had its struggles lately, including Liberatore, who's been a disaster for the month of June. We've seen this bullpen start to show some real cracks. Stanek right now is away from the team for family reasons. And then you look at the offense, and we've mentioned the best players are all slumping. And despite all of those factors, over the last 25 games, they're 500. Okay, that's pretty good. And now it just comes down to, can you get that stuff patched up in a 3 to 4 week stretch? And that's the question that they're going to have to answer, and nobody can answer that other than them. It's not going to be easy. I mean, you look at the schedule and how it's presented coming up. You've got the 3 games over the 4th of July weekend at Wrigley. Good luck. That's always a house of horrors. Then you've got 5 games in 4 days against the Milwaukee Brewers. You want to talk about some good pitching that you're about to see? Well, how about Woodruff, Harrison, and Mizorowski in 3 consecutive days? Good luck. Then you have Atlanta, where you're expected to once again see Martin Perez and Reynaldo Lopez, who we just saw shut this offense down over the last couple of days. And if that's not enough, you come back out of the break with 3 games on the road at Arizona, a team that just beat you head-to-head. 3 games on the road at the LA Angels, who have some pretty good pitching. They're not a great team, but pretty good pitching on that side of things. And that basically takes you up to trade deadline decision time. So much like a season ago, and I think last week we had this conversation, T-Bone, what is your level of concern that we are watching 2025 all over again? It's starting to feel more and more likely that that's the case. I don't take any pleasure in saying that. I wish it was going to be different. And if it was, boy, now's a good time to show us. If the Cardinals want this to feel different than it did a year ago, they would respond in Wrigley. They would respond by winning 4 out of 5 against the Milwaukee Brewers. My level of confidence in any of that happening is extremely low, given what they've been and who those teams have been lately. But that would be the signs of life that we kind of need to see. And if you're Chaim Bloom and they were able to do that, let's say they win 2 out of 3 at Chicago, 4 out of 5 against Milwaukee, and 2 out of 3 against Atlanta to finish out the first half. That is such a different feel, and it would give you confidence. All right, they went through their slump. They came out on the other side. They were able to figure it out. Maybe this team is worth investing in, but I think that's the kind of thing that's going to be necessary.
Yeah, and the part that is so, I don't know, frustrating is the right word about it, is I agree everything seems to be trending towards how it happened last year, right? Where it was, we would sit in the studio, we would talk about it, boy, man, maybe they're more surprising, maybe they're buyers at the deadline, and then you have an awful July and you go, yep, clearly sellers. The part that is so frustrating or disappointing about it is, even if they can't turn it around, I still believe in them more than I did last year. And the reason I say that is this top 4 is legitimate in as the identity of this team. And as you said, they have found their core with Wetherholt, Herrera, Burleson, and Jordan Walker. I believe in those 4. And I believe that even if they don't get it right in time, they are going to fix it, right? That is the identity of this team. I knew the pitching wasn't going to be able to mask up any struggles offensively. That's not surprising. And honestly, if you end up with Palante, May, and McGreevy pitching well, I'd go, well, all right, that's kind of a win for the St. Louis Cardinals. But the reason I say it would almost be more frustrating is last year's team, the moment it fell off, I was like, aha, see, I finally told you. Fetty and Michaelis couldn't be the guys that would get you through the finish line. And I knew that they were eventually going to have this, and they were never a part of the future for the St. Louis Cardinals. And honestly, at that point last year, you didn't have this good of an offense. Because that's why I came in the year going, Walker probably not going to make it as a big leaguer. I'd be shocked if they're not a bottom 10 offense in the league. And that's what makes this season almost more frustrating than last year's collapse if it happens, is because if they fall out of it and they sell at the deadline, I'm still going to look at them and go, man, that was just bad timing, because I still believe in what this core is going into 2027.
The last time the Cardinals went through an extended slump, they rebounded with a weekend against the Chicago Cubs. And it was ignited by moves from Chaim Bloom. We're going to get into what those potential moves could be if they try it again, coming up next here on the Redbird Report. The last time we saw the Cardinals go through an extended slump, it was the offense that was the problem. And it was against Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh, 3 divisional foes, and they were going into a weekend series against the Chicago Cubs. In that stretch, they lost 6 out of 7 games, and they scored a total of 2 runs in 3 days against the Milwaukee Brewers. It felt really bad. It felt as though that was the moment where things could completely come off of the rails. And then Chaim Bloom made aggressive choices to revamp what the lineup looked like. He brought up at the time a guy that everybody wanted to see coming out of spring training, and they had a whole lot of power that was added to the lineup. Nelson Velazquez was reinserted into the lineup and boom, immediately made his presence felt in that Friday night game against the Chicago Cubs. T-Bone, the aggressive moves to revamp that lineup is basically what allowed them over the next couple of weeks to get things back on track. It felt like it gave them the jolt that they needed. We've talked about this a lot in the past where there were times where Mo would avoid those moves or just for whatever reason not make them. And it felt like the Cardinals died on the vine because of it. Is there another round of moves that could take place this time around that allow them to get things back on track the way that it did about 6 weeks ago?
I don't know if they can, but I'm starting to wonder if they would explore calling up Baez. And the reason I say that I don't know if they can is, one, I don't know how you play him, Joshua Baez, that is, because I don't think they want to play him in center, and I don't know how comfortable they really are with Nootbaar out there, but they did put him out there in back-to-back games just recently, so there is a chance that they might be willing to explore that. And the other thing is as much as it seems weird to say is, oh, maybe you do that, Nathan Churn's been pretty good of late, right? I mean, he's doing the thing that they've asked him to do, which is draw walks, right? They wanted him to try and get on base more. And since the middle of June, he's got a 242 average. He's getting on base at a 324 clip, and he's slugging 424. He's 9% above league average. That would be the only guy that I could point to and say, well, you pull him out of the line and you put Joshua Baez in. Because it's not like Baez can go to third base where Blaze Jordan is struggling. I don't think they would want to DH him a lot, and let alone I don't know that they want to DH Nootbaar much, because then you're kind of pulling down his value as well. But that would be the only offensive move that I can see that they would look to and say, this can kind of right the offense. On the pitching side, I'd like to see Gastelum up here. You know, he's been pitching very well down in the minor leagues. And I'm sorry, watching Graceffo in the game 2 of the series against the Braves, watching Justin Brule, I'm looking at those guys going, man, it's time to try something else. And I get it, Graceffo's numbers aren't as bad, but you peek under the hood and it's like, whoa, regression is really going to come for him. It reminds me when they had Jake Woodford up here. And I think it was the first year of Ollie Marmol's tenure in 2022, I believe, where it was like, man, Woodford's got like a 2.5 ERA, yet they're sending him down to the minor leagues to work on pitch shaping. What is this about? It was because it wasn't sustainable. And I feel that way about Graceffo. If they wanted to send down Rajic, I'd be okay with that as well. Or if you wanted to DFA Brule, and I get it, that means you only got one lefty. I just need guys that get outs. So I would explore Gastelum for sure to call him up here. And if Libby has one more rough start, I'm sorry, but I still think he's should be close to being on the chopping block in terms of just losing his rotation job.
How long ago do you think it was, in terms of the last time that Luis Gastelum allowed a run?
Oh, I know he's on a tear. Is it like 17 innings, something like that?
May 17th. It's been 6 weeks since Luis Gastelum has allowed a run.
Was that
in a game.
Blow up against?
It was not. It was the day after.
Good.
So on the 13th,
I was in attendance for the blow up.
Yeah, on the 13th, that was his one actual bad game this year.
Yeah.
He allowed 6 earned runs in 2/3 of an inning. Did not get out of the inning. The next appearance, he allowed 2 hits and 1 earned run against Jacksonville. Maybe Jacksonville just had something against him, but the last time he was great against them. Since then, since May 17th, he has not allowed a single earned run. And in his last 28 days, he has 16 strikeouts out of the 41 at-bats taken against him. He is allowing opposing hitters to have a batting average against of 122. This guy's ready. Like, it's very clear, and I know we talked to Derek Gould on the show today. He mentioned, hey, they've got a lot of modeling now that they're using to tell them when guys are actually ready for the big leagues. I don't need modeling to tell me that this guy's ready. Like, the results speak for themselves, and at a certain point in time, that is worthy of a call-up. He's got a pitch that can clearly play at the big league level in his changeup, and I want to see it. And you also, much like what we've seen previously, especially when it comes to the position players, you don't have guys that are just like producing too much to avoid this call up. At the big league level in the bullpen, you have guys that are blowing up right now. Every time they seemingly go to somebody, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. And especially when they go to Brule. And I've been one of the only Justin Brule advocates in the city of St. Louis this season. I'm even ready at this point to say, all right, it didn't work. It's time to go to something different. Let's see if somebody like Luis Gastelum can come up and have some success. I don't know if they're ready to make this move yet. I would guess not. I would also be comfortable with them going to Bryson Motts in the bullpen now too. And just using him for length, giving him 2 to 3 innings at a time, coming out of the bullpen as a lefty. I would personally prefer to see him as a starter and put Matthew Liberatore into that role, but if they're uncomfortable doing so, fine. Let's see what it looks like if he gets an opportunity coming out of the bullpen. I am pretty soon ready to see what Quinn Matthews looks like as a starter for this team in the rotation. He has a 2 ERA in 5 starts so far this month, 31 strikeouts in 26 innings. And most notably, he's starting to cut down on the walks a little bit. That's been his big issue down at the minor league level. So I think there are some things they could do. What of those is most likely going into this weekend against the Chicago Cubs? I think if they're going to make a move, it's probably just Luis Gastelum. It's something where they call up a bullpen arm to give them a little bit more optionality, especially in the leverage innings, because right now you just don't trust the guys that are coming into these games. I think that's the one that could maybe stop the bleeding a bit in the bullpen.
Yeah, and I'm open-minded to it. I don't know about the Mott's one. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I mean, they were willing to, maybe they weren't willing to, but I know there was a conversation about that in spring training of potentially putting him in the bullpen. I think you continue to see what Liberatore looks like here over the next start or two. And if he looks like he's kind of rebounded and you say, okay, maybe he's found it. Maybe it was a catcher problem, right? Where they put Herrera behind the plate for that start. Then maybe you could explore that, because I feel better about your depth with Dobbins and Matthews down there. And it's not like you need 5 arms ready to go, right? I don't think that would be the case, but you could just restretch out Mott. I think it's time for them to potentially make that move. And I can't imagine what the model would be saying as to why he's not ready. I don't know if that's swing and miss. They don't think the pitch would profile well. But I said this I think on the last episode, I would question what the model was saying too, because I think there's a point where we need to use the eye test here, because the model said Blaze Jordan, not a third baseman. I know he had 2 errors in the game against the Braves. I think Blaze Jordan's been fine with their third base.
The irony here, I don't think that was a modeling thing. I don't think they use many models for defense. I think that was an eye test. Like, he did not look the part of a third baseman to them, and then they changed their mind on that.
And the other one that I would point out as well is, now, there was circumstances here at play to where at the time I was like, okay, this makes sense. But it's with Jimmy Crooks being called up, right? I mean, they called him up and they said, hey, look, we're ready to move on from the Paz experience. Let's bring Jimmy Crooks here. We'll make Paz the third catcher. And that guy looks more overmatched than Pedro Paz did at the plate. And in fact, looking at his numbers, and again, you know what I think of WAR, he's been a worse WAR on the season, according to Baseball Reference, than Pedro Paz. So I think it's time to bring up Gastelum. I don't see the argument not to do it. If they don't want to make the change in the rotation with Libby, you know what? Fine. I still don't understand that one, but that one is a little bit more reasonable. I don't see anybody that's truly blocking Gastelum. And if they're like, well, what do we do on the 40-man? I'd go, well, I can point to a Cesar Prieto that I don't think has a role on this team. I could point to Pozo. I don't know that Pozo has a team on this roster moving forward. You could DFA one of those 2 guys and get him on this 40-man.
Or, like, if your move is Brewell, he just gets DFA'd.
Sure,
right? It's
100%.
a one-for-one flip of those 2 guys on both the 26 and the 40-man roster. So you can make it work that way as well. I think there are, again, that one's probably the most likely. If you wanted to make the Baez move, I'm open to it. I don't think they're likely to do that. I think that's probably more of a second half decision. But I do think the Gastelum move could help them. That'll at least, because like yesterday, for example, a game where we watched last night. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. Cardinals last night lost 5-1 against the Atlanta Braves. That score looks pretty misleading relative to what the game was. That was a very tight game going into the 8th inning. It was 2-1. Cardinals were losing at the time. And they had done nothing offensively. But because their chase relievers to chase the game were so bad, with Brewell going out there and just not being able to keep the game where it was, or Graceffo, same thing, that's where you had the issues. And it should not have gotten as out of hand as it did. And that's where some of the defensive issues came into things as well. But those guys just weren't able to keep the game where it needed to be. The other news that we saw this week was Matthew Liberatore getting another start, as we all expected that he would, and switching up the catcher. This is something that I've been advocating for a couple of weeks, because I think at this point, if you're going to keep going back to Libby, and they clearly are, at least switch up the other variables in these games. Like, find out, is it just Libby? Is he the big problem here? Or are there other explanations or excuses, whatever you want to call them, that are leading to some of these issues? One of those potential explanations or excuses was the catcher behind the plate. He had been throwing every game to Pedro Paz. They decide finally to go with Ivan Herrera behind the plate. Apparently, Herrera had advocated to do so. He previously was just like the personal catcher for McGreevy and Palante. They switched it up this time around. It went great. And there were tangible changes for Matthew Liberatore in this game that speak to, all right, maybe there was something here in pitch usage with Herrera behind the plate compared to Paz. So Herrera, while behind the plate, had Matthew Liberatore throw the majority of his pitches, the majority of what he threw that night, were sliders. It was the most used pitch on the game for Matthew Liberatore. Prior to this start against the Braves, Matthew Liberatore only had one other appearance this season in which his four-seam fastball was not his most used pitch. Now, the reason why I find that interesting is because his four-seam fastball has mostly been terrible this season. Now, to be fair, a lot of his pitches do not have great numbers, but the four-seam is like maybe the worst of all of his pitches so far this year. Meanwhile, the slider and the curveball have been outstanding. They're pretty darn good when it comes to the numbers against. Some of that is situationally where you would use them, especially as a put-away pitch. I understand that. But in this game, he was not getting ahead. He was consistently behind, and he walked like 5 batters overall. So it's not explained by that either. This was Herrera leaning on his best pitch. And on that night, his best pitch was the slider. Kudos to you, Ivan Herrera. That's what we've wanted to see from Matthew Liberatore is pitch backwards a little bit more. Don't rely on your fastball as much because it's not a very good pitch for you. And it hasn't been a very good pitch, even dating back to when he was in the bullpen, when he was throwing primarily his breaking balls. And we talked about that at the time as well. They switched to the plan with him when he went to the pen. This is looking more like bullpen version of Matthew Liberatore than the starter version that we've seen of Matthew Liberatore this season. So I liked what the results looked like. Obviously, five innings of 1 earned run with 9 strikeouts. That's going to play. T-Bone, do you think this was about the catcher? Was it about Libby? Was it about the Braves? What did you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's at least worth monitoring to see if it was the catcher moving forward. I agree with you there. And look, at the time I said they can change it up all they want. I'm not sure it matters. And then I saw it happen and it worked. I don't think it works long term. I just think this is Matthew Liberatore stuff that's not playing right now at the big league level. So I don't know that it matters, but kudos to Ivan Herrera for, like you said, saying let's go to the slider and also being willing to deviate away from what the scouting report says, right? I mean, Derek mentioned this on the show today. Hey, sometimes the report would say this is a great curveball spot. And Ivan Herrera is reading the game like you'd hear Yadier Molina would do all the time and what some of the best catchers in the sport do all the time and going, it feels like 110 outside. This guy's sweating like crazy. Feels like he's throwing a cue ball when he's trying to throw a breaking ball and has no feel for it. We're not going to that pitch. We're going to the slider. I don't care what the scouting report says. I'm going to read the game and make that decision. So I think you try this moving forward. You stick with Herrera being with Liberatore. Now, I'm fascinated to see who that means draws the short straw and loses Herrera as their battery mate, whether that's McGreevy or Andre Palante.
I wonder if they do it based upon the opponent, too. Like, coming up, you've got McGreevy will be going right after Libby for the 5th versus the 6th. I'm guessing they will go with just Palante. So it'll be Palante and Libby as the two days that you see Ivan Herrera behind the plate. Yeah,
and I that would make sense then because they don't want to play him in back-to-back behind the plate, and I don't think they want to move him to be in the quote-unquote primary catcher where he catches 3 out of the 5 guys in the rotation, and I'll be curious to see what that means for McGreevy, who's then going to lose out on him, right? Will we see more questions kind of emerge of, okay, does McGreevy stuff start to dissipate? Because then that would raise a real question about, okay, well, what's going on with Crooks or Pages, who are behind the plate.
Or how good is Ivan Herrera at pitch calling?
100%. But am I like all in now that, Liberatore is fixed? No. My bet today would be Matthew Liberatore is not fixed. We continue to see some bad outings along the way, and at some point he loses his rotation job. But at least they are trying something, a new variable, to see if this is the thing that can help him out.
I'm not doing it again.
Good for
I've
you.
fallen for the Matthew Liberatore black magic, and I will not fall for that again. Not this time. You can't do it to me, Matthew Liberatore. I remember seeing those games against, God, what was it? It was Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, back-to-back appearances. Now, the earned runs were different. It was 4 and 3 in those 2 games. But he had 4 2/3 innings, 9 strikeouts, 5 innings, 10 strikeouts, 19 strikeouts over the course of 9 innings against the Brewers and the Pirates. I fell for it. I was like, this is the Matthew Liberatore we've all been waiting for. And then over the next couple of starts, it was a disaster. And that's when we got to the month of June, and he had an 8.3 ERA. So, no, I'm not falling for what we saw against Atlanta. If we see 3 or 4 more of those starts, all right, I'll start to buy in again. But 1? No. I'm going to need to see a lot more than that out of Libby.
What about Kyle Leahy? You falling for him? Because this is him over his last 3 starts. And this is another one, because I think that was a 3-start sample that you pointed to with Liberatore, where I said, hey, look, this is a small sample size. Let's not get out over our skis, but it's interesting. Leahy over the last 3 starts, 17 1/3 innings pitch, 2 quality starts in that time frame. He's only 1-1, but I don't care about the record. 4 earned runs in the last 17 1/3 innings pitched, 12 hits, 6 walks, 15 strikeouts, 2.08 ERA, 2.42 FIP.
I think we're starting to learn what Leahy is. I think Leahy is basically Andre Pallante. And then it becomes a question of how do you value that? What is the value of Kyle Leahy if you have Andre Pallante as part of your rotation? I think both of them are probably long-term mid-4s ERAs. Guys that can get you 5 innings consistently, and if you want to push them further than that, they can, but there's always that risk of them falling apart the 3rd time through the order. So maybe what they view it as is, hey, we're going to see Andre Pallante get more expensive here pretty soon. He becomes a trade asset, Kyle Leahy takes Pallante's spot in the rotation, and we're able to build it out that way. That's possible. But I think we know what Kyle Leahy, for the most part, what he is. I think they have tried to sell us on theirs, this upside with Kyle Leahy. I don't really buy it. I don't think there's a ton of upside here, and that's fine. Not every starter has upside. But if he can become an innings eater for them, I do see the value. He serves as the example that I think Andre Pallante did a couple of years ago, where fans got extremely annoyed by watching Pallante go out there every 5th day. And I was like, yeah, man, but I've seen this work, and he's transitioning to a new role as a starter. Let's give this a little bit of grace before we just completely punt on the project. I was frustrated by Leahy, but I at least understood with him why they stuck with it, because it was a few starts that didn't go well. Liberatore to me is a completely different story. This has been a calendar year of him being one of the worst qualified starters in Major League Baseball. So that is the way that I would kind of look at both of them a little bit differently. But am I falling for Leahy? Am I buying into this? I guess that depends what you mean by that. Do I think he's a guy that's going to have like a sub-3 ERA, something like that, as he has over the last 3 starts? No. But I do think this speaks to some of the improvements that we've seen from his arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think you're seeing a guy sub-3 ERA, but I mean, like, if you even date this back further, like to the beginning of May, in 10 starts, 3.29 ERA, 3.4 FIP.
That's really good.
And where I can understand where the Cardinals might be starting to get, or not starting, I guess they were here already, are dreaming more on some higher upside than what we may have thought or may think altogether is the pitch arsenal. He throws everything but the kitchen sink. I mean, I think he's one of like 4 starters in baseball that throws 6 pitches like 10% or more of the time. It's like him, McGreevy, and then some random dude I've never heard of from the White Sox, and there was somebody else. I can see how that's appealing because that's what made Seth Lugo effective when he first moved from bullpen arm to the rotation. Does it have the upside of being like a 1 or a 2? No, I think what you said is probably right. I think the upside to this is more in that Pallante, I would argue maybe even in that McGreevy range as a number 3, number 4 starter that's got decent swing and miss stuff. And that's where it's interesting. Now, even though I read that 3 start sample size, he's still basically allowing a base runner an inning. And that's where I think, I don't know that he fixes that problem ever, but if he can pitch the way he has over his last 10 starts, I think you're 100% spot on. Very valuable piece to have as he goes through the pre-arbitration system and into year 1, 2 of ARB. And then he becomes one that you look at and go, okay, now it's time to find our next 3 or 4 compared to what they used to have to do, which was go give, $10 to $20 million for those guys.
Lugo's a really interesting comparison. I mean, nobody would consider him to be an ace, but he had a really excellent season in 2024. Other than that, he's been really good. That's a really good comparison.
And he doesn't have a ton of strikeout stuff, but it's just enough to help him get by, right? I think he's around like 7 to 8 strikeouts per 9 innings, a little bit of the walks, 2 to 3 per 9 innings. I think that's kind of what the Cardinals saw in him, because that's the only thing that I can think of. Because like if you look at Kyle Leahy, it's not your typical, hey, this starter has like 2 dominant pitches, right? It's not like Paul Skeens, where it's like that guy's got a splinker and an unbelievable fastball.
Or Spencer Strider when he was at his best.
Yeah, where it was good fastball and then kind of added a slider into it. He doesn't have one of those, but you know what he can do? I can throw any of my 6 pitches in any count. How do you guess that, right? And if he can tunnel those well, then you're talking about a guy that doesn't have to have overpowering stuff. He can just keep guys off balance, and he's got a good enough velo to kind of keep people behind on his fastball.
I'll say this. Right now I'm buying more into Kyle Leahy as a starter for the Cardinals in 2028 than I am Matthew Liberatore. You know, like I think there's a higher likelihood of him being a part of this rotation long term than there is for a guy like Libby. So that's the way that I would probably view it as of right now. All right, coming up on the other side here on the Redbird Report, the next 10 days are going to go a long way in what the Cardinals decide to do at the trade deadline. Is there a new name we should be monitoring as we get closer to said deadline? We'll talk about that next here on the Redbird Report. All right, T-Bone, the other day, I was listening to my guy, Bernie Miklasz, and I got mad. I got really mad. Not just at Bernie, but at even the thought of making this kind of a move. So Bernie Miklasz was on his show, and he brought up the idea of, hey, Masyn Winn should not be an untouchable. He's a guy that we've seen the offense decline each and every year over the last 3 seasons. Yes, he's great defensively, but he's had some of these back issues in the past. He's got the leg issues. He does get banged up over time, and he just might not be an everyday shortstop at an all-star caliber level for a contending team. Like that may not be his future. And if that's the case, do you consider listening to offers for him at the trade deadline? Because you could get a pretty big haul for a guy of his pedigree with his defense, his age, his contract. That combination of skill, contract, age, all of that, you could get a really good return for somebody like Masyn Winn. And my response to that was, man, screw you. No, they shouldn't trade that guy. Like, of course not. I love watching Masyn Winn. He's excellent defensively. The identity of the St. Louis Cardinals for years has been defense. This guy plays the most premium defensive position, and he does it at an elite level, the likes of which I'm not sure I've seen since Andrelton Simmons at that specific position. And they're going to give up on that? Like, of course not. He's 24 years old. They're in a rebuild. He's cheap. He's cost controlled. This is what you build around Bernie Miklasz. What have you done? Like, why? I thought he had lost his mind. And then I had time to calm down. And as I thought about it more, because that was my emotional brain talking, as I thought about it more pragmatically, he's got a point. And it annoys me that that's the case, just as I didn't like saying that the Cardinals probably should trade Brendan Donovan in the offseason, but I could understand the rationale behind it if they listened to offers on Masyn Winn. Now, I would not be shopping him. I would not be in a spot where I'm like, hey, this is something that we are incentivized to do. No, you're not. He's 24 years old. He's a good player. Like, you can keep him, and you're fine. And you can build around this guy as your shortstop, and it's him and J.J. Wetherholt in the middle infield for years to come. There's nothing wrong with that. I like that middle infield for years to come. But if a team comes along, let's say it's the Dodgers, or maybe it's the Yankees, or maybe the Houston Astros call and they say, hey, we're going to move on from Jeremy Pena in the offseason. We'd like to get in on these negotiations. Or the Angels call with some of their pitching talent that they've got, or the Phillies call. They've got a bunch of young pitching talent as well. Maybe one of these teams gets into the conversation and they're willing to offer you close to major league level pitching prospects that you believe have a higher upside than any of Jurangelo Cijntje, Quinn Matthews, Bryson Motts, any of these guys that have previously been in the conversation for the Cardinals outside of maybe Liam Doyle. I understand why you would consider that. You mentioned the name earlier today that I think is a good one. I don't think he has quite the same value personally as what Masyn Winn does, but when Durbin was traded from the Brewers in the offseason to the Boston Red Sox, in return, the Brewers got a guy who's probably their number 2 starter right now, in Kyle Harrison. That's the kind of return we're talking about here, where you could get real, legit, major league caliber pitching in a deal like this.
Yeah, I find it interesting that if they were to have this conversation around Masyn Winn, because I think Masyn Winn is a good baseball player, and I think sometimes the way I come off on air, people don't think I believe that. He is a good ball player. Now, I do think he gets a little overvalued because defense really bumps up his WAR numbers, which is what teams look at, right? I mean, I'm looking at the year when he had 5.2 WAR or 5.1 B WAR, which is baseball reference WAR. That was tied for 17th best in baseball.
I was about to say, to put some context on that, a 5-win player is an all-star by every standard.
And I like Masyn Winn, and he had a decent offensive year. He's 4% above league average. He was not tied for the 17th best value baseball player in the sport, in my opinion.
Based upon your metrics, based upon mine, I think he was.
I know. But I think it would be fascinating if they had this conversation, because he is someone that does carry value across baseball, whether I believe that's too much or not, and could potentially get you a really good piece back in return, or pieces back in return. And it's not like, a lot of people, when they would hear this conversation, their first thought would be, well, who's your shortstop then? You don't have anybody in the minor leagues. Thomas Ajaci's your shortstop down in the minors. J.J. Wetherholt would slide over and become your shortstop. And if you think that guy's WAR is high now, playing second base, imagine what it'll look like at shortstop if he plays good defense there, like he's been doing at second base, and he does everything well. I mean, that's a guy that could bring a higher WAR, if not the same kind of WAR that Masyn Winn had that year. But second base is just a easier position to fill in theory, because it's less premium, right? So you can go to the market. We see second basemen like Luis Arraez get small deals all the time. You can slide over, maybe they believe Jesus Baez is a future guy that's going to be a big leaguer. Well, you could slide him over from shortstop to second base. Or if you want to keep Wetherholt at second base, maybe Baez is here in 2 years and can fill that spot at shortstop. I would understand if they decide to listen to it, because it's cashing in on a chip while you feel like you've got internal pieces. And if you're going through this retool, rebuild phase in your build, you're still looking at value, right? How you can get more value in return to add to your pipeline. And with that being said, I don't think there's many guys that would be untouchable, right? I think Walker, I think Wetherholt, and then I think maybe Herrera, and then Doyle and some of your top pitching prospects are the untouchables. I would get it if they decide to go that route. What I would find fascinating is as you were talking, I was kind of thinking over here. Would you just sell him? And what I mean by that is you trade him out and you take prospects back in return. So you go after like say a Senja, those kind of prospects, high-level pitching prospects. Or would you try and use him and flip him for a starter that's got control, that's already gotten big league experience?
So who are the teams that come to mind for you in that?
That's the thing, that it would be tough, because like Reed Detmers, Jose Soriano, those are guys that have control, but to me, you're almost overpaying for them.
The Angels have a shortstop.
Exactly, but I was just using them as kind of a placeholder, because that's kind of what I am thinking, is you could go after, or even like Harris, as you had mentioned with the Brewers. He had big league experience already, and he was clearly ready to go. But I wonder if they would look at this and say, maybe we could entice a team that's going to be rebuilding. And again, I don't have a name in mind, but who's got like 4 years of club control. We'll give them a shortstop. They give us a good pitcher in return.
So a player that comes to mind, I don't think this would work because I don't think the age matches up with their timeline, but like Joe Ryan. He's 30 years old. He's a really good pitcher. He's under club control for a couple more years. I don't think that's enough control, and I don't think he's young enough to make a move like this, but they could use a shortstop. And if somebody in a similar spot to a younger version of Joe Ryan could make that kind of a move, I could see how there would be appeal in that, and I wouldn't write it off. Like, I'm open to that idea. If you've got a pitcher who has 4 years of club control remaining, and you could do like, maybe it's Matthew Liberatore plus Masyn Winn for that pitcher, right? Something along those lines. Or Leahy / Palante, one of those two, plus Masyn Winn for this upgrade in your rotation. Would I be interested in doing something like that? Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that would be a good move for the Cardinals potentially. I'm not tied to this needs to be a 21-year-old who's in the upper levels of the minor leagues right now. I find the idea of this kind of a move to be upsetting when I first think about it, because it is the definition of a rebuilding move. I've got a good player on a good contract on a team that's playing above its head right now, who fans have really taken to, and I'm going to trade him for a maybe. That I hate those trades. I hate them because I grew up watching them. But I also have to say, as a secondary piece of that, I understand it. I get why you would make a move like that, even if it is upsetting.
Because if you, and again, they don't have to make the move, but let's just say they decide we are sellers at the deadline. The only pieces right now that they're getting major returns from are Lars Nootbaar. May is a maybe.
I disagree with you on May. I think you would have to get a return that's significant for him because of the comp pick that's potentially associated. But
let me rephrase that. If you sell a piece, I'm assuming it's because it's what you want in return. But like you're saying, like I don't know that May's getting dealt because I'm with you. They've got to get past that comp pick that they would get in return.
It's like a top 40 selection.
Yeah, and when you think about it, like Dustin May's a guy that would be like a 3 in a rotation. We saw last year teams weren't willing to trade for those guys. I mean, I think the only rental starter that was dealt at the deadline was Merrill Kelly. And the Diamondbacks re-signed him in the offseason after they got like a bag of balls for him, essentially. They just got lottery tickets for him. So the reason I said that is because I think the only guys that they would sell right now at the deadline that I'd say they sold because they got the value they wanted is Nootbaar. Because I'm not sure they would listen on O'Brien, but I don't know. Teams have watched what O'Brien's done. They see what we've seen of, hey, this guy looks pretty shaky right now. Do I really want to trade a lot for a guy that, yes, has control, but he's in his 30s already? Do I really want to give up a ton of prospects for that? I think teams right now would say no. And for JoJo, you'd sell him, but you're not getting a ton of value in return on a JoJo Romero as a rental left-handed specialist reliever. So the only thing that you'd be selling that has a ton of value would be Nootbaar. Okay, now I see how you start to go, what if we did float Masyn Winn out there? Because that would get us some real pieces.
I don't think they'll do this. I think this is more of an off-season conversation than an in-season conversation, and the off-season's going to be thrown into flux because of the lockout. So I don't think this is the kind of thing you will see the Cardinals do, but I understand why it would potentially become a conversation.
May not get done at the deadline, but might be where conversations start to lead to the offseason.
Absolutely, could be. If you see a report that's out there that says, hey, Cardinals listening on Alec Burleson, Lars Nootbaar, Masyn Winn, Dustin May, don't be shocked by that, right? Like I could see something like that coming. That does not mean they will for sure do it. So keep that in mind. If you see something like that and you're wondering what's the rationale behind it, it's what we were just talking about on what the return could potentially be for those caliber of players. All right, to finish off the show today, T-Bone, by the time we talk again, the Cardinals will have played like 100 games. They play 1 more against Atlanta, then 3 against Chicago, and then they have 4 more against Milwaukee by the time we talk next. What are you watching? What's the thing you're going to have your eye on over the course of the next week?
I said it during last week's episode when we recorded as they were wrapping up the Diamondbacks, and then we're getting ready for this Marlins and Braves series, and it sticks the same because it didn't change. And it is, are the top 4 guys going to get this going or not? They are the linchpin to what decides the fate of the St. Louis Cardinals. They are the ones that determine if they are buyers or sellers. And no pressure, but I mean, that's just the way it is right now. The pitching is not going to be able to overcome this for them. They don't have good enough arms. The pitching is fine by definition. That doesn't help you when an offense is slumping. And you can't rely on 5 through 9 to constantly be doing it. And to Nootbaar's credit, he's been very good since being activated, but you're never going to rely on Nootbaar, Church, Blaze Jordan, Nelson Velasquez, Fermin. Those guys won't carry a team for the next, let alone just the upcoming week, but up until we get to the trade deadline. You got to get the 4 big bats going. And I'm not worried about them in the long term. I think all 4 of them are going to be fine. But as we said at the very beginning, the timing of this is very concerning for a team that is leaning towards sell already, and they're just not hitting. And I thought they would be able to get this going in the middle of June because, hey, they're going against the Twins, and yeah, you ran into Joe Ryan, but the Twins aren't anything special, you know? And then you saw that Arizona series, and that's when I really thought they'd get going. Merrill Kelly hadn't been good, and then he shoved against them. And then I don't remember who the other arm was that they saw, but they saw another arm that wasn't all that good for him, and he still shut them down in that series. So I thought they were going to figure it out against Arizona, and it didn't happen. And I knew they wouldn't figure it out against Miami. This Braves staff is fine. I mean, you saw the first 2 arms they threw out in this series. Those aren't guys that are leading a rotation through the playoffs. When you run into Milwaukee, you better have it figured out because Mizorowski, Harrison, as you said, and Woodruff, those 3, those guys will shut you down. The Cubs are toothpicks and bubble gum right now with what they're throwing out. They've got to get this going here or they're going to be sellers.
We've seen this team respond every time they've had their backs against the wall. I'm curious if they have another one in it because we saw them get swept against Seattle and they lost 2 out of 3 against Miami. They respond by sweeping Pittsburgh and then winning 2 out of 3 against LA. That was a great response by the St. Louis Cardinals. The next time that we saw this, they lost those games against Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, and then they won 2 out of 3 against Chicago. Can they do it again? Do they have another one of those in them, or is this just becoming too much? is it starting to mount to the point where that series in Kansas City, that was the beginning of the end. And we're going to look back on it and say, we probably should have known. Pitching was going to have too many of its issues. Offense wasn't going to be able to sustain for 162. And ultimately, they settle in as more of a 500 club than a team that's legitimately competing for the playoffs. That is what is potentially at stake over the next couple of weeks. And over the next week, I want to see if they've got one more stand in them. They won 2 out of the last 3 games. We feel really negative right now coming off of the loss. If they are able to win this game tonight in Atlanta, and then they go to Wrigley and win 2 out of 3, it's going to have a very different feel to it, and it'll go back to what it was whenever they had beat Chicago in that weekend series here in St. Louis. Can they do it again? Do they have another one of those in them for like the Cardinals' last stand prior to the All-Star break? That's what I'm going to be watching for. That's what the next week will potentially represent for your St. Louis Cardinals. For Tanner Hendrickson, for Noah on the video side of things, I'm Brandon Kiley. You guys have yourself a fantastic 4th of July weekend. Be safe out there. If you're going to drink and you need to get home, just get yourself an Uber. It's super easy. I promise you that $20-$30 are going to be worth it. So we appreciate you tuning in as always. If you have not done so yet, check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/101ESPNSTL. Subscribe to our podcast feed over there. That'll make things very easy for you the next time we put out a podcast. We'll talk to you guys next week here on the Redbird Report.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.